The next thing we're going to talk about is return from injury. So a reader recently wrote me, actually this wasn't recent, this was a while ago, and I apologize for not getting back to him earlier. I get so many emails, tweets, messages, sometimes even phone calls, and it's just completely impossible to answer each one of them. I do my best, I try, I'm going out of my mind. So sometimes you send me a message, you might be getting an answer a couple months, or even a couple of years later. I apologize, it's just the way it is. So the question is, how do you deal with recovering from a more serious injury? I, the reader writes, had shoulder surgery and I'm out for 6 months. How do I keep the mental edge? How do I keep my sanity? Is there anything I can do to not lose my focus on BJJ and also not to lose everything that I've learned? What about a mindset when you finally do return and you're out of shape and behind? So, first of all, I'm sorry to hear this. Injuries suck, but ultimately they are part of the game. If you do this stuff for long enough, if you do anything for long enough, if you do badminton for long enough, you're going to have a layoff. Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, a little bit more physical, a little bit more likely that you are going to have layoffs. Hopefully your injuries are minor. Hopefully you don't require surgery like this reader did. And hopefully, you don't have a 6-month layoff. But these things can happen. And you know what? If you're an adult and you end up having a kid, you're going to have a long layoff. If you go through a crazy work crunch, you're going to have a long layoff. The girlfriend makes a bad decision, wants to go to Mexico for a couple of weeks instead of you staying home and training, you're going to have a layoff. So you got to learn to deal with layoffs even if you never ever get injured. So you've had a layoff, let's say it's a serious injury, what do you do? Really your question is two-part. What do you do for the rehab? And then what do you do for the return to the mats? So let's start with the rehab first. The first and most important golden rule is you do not want to make it worse. Something like a rib injury is a great example. I don't know anybody who does Brazilian Jiu-jitsu who's had a rib injury and hasn't come back to the mat too early and re-injured that damn rib. Don't do that with a shoulder. Shoulder is way trickier than a rib, right? There's lots of little muscles there, lots of rotator cuff muscles. You don't want to rush back too fast. Let that damn thing heal. And even worse than coming back and irritating it is re-injuring it. Now they've got to go in there. They've already done surgery on it. Now they've got to go in there and work their way past the scar tissue and work with the little fragments of tissue you have left. Don't be that guy. Better to take an extra month or two, trust your doctors, and then come back and then actually have a shoulder that you can trust. So, with that caveat, not to re-injure that body part, what else can you do? And I think physically, cardio is the most important thing. You probably won't be able to do much weightlifting with a bum shoulder, but what you will be able to do is you'll be able to run, you'll be able to do the elliptical, you'll be able to climb hills, you'll be able to hike mountains. You got to keep your cardio up. Your cardio is one of the very first things to go when you're injured and when you've got a long layoff. So even if you're going on vacation to Mexico, bring your running shoes, keep the cardio up. Your jiu-jitsu will thank you for it when you get back. So find a way to keep that cardio up. Then additionally, if you can do any strength training whatsoever, that's a good thing. Depending on your injury, maybe you can work your legs. If your upper body's injured, work your lower body. If your lower body's injured, work your upper body. That helps, but strength fades slower than cardio. So you have a little bit more time to have a layoff and not get all freaked out about about losing all your conditioning. Now, during that rehab part, what do you do to keep your mind sharp? What do you do to keep your head in the game? Well, for a lot of people, what works is to watch either competition footage and or instructional footage, right? Maybe there's an area of your game that you've been hoping to research, like how do I pass spider guard? How do I, attack from side mount? What are 3 great attacks from side mount? So let's say the 180 spin armbar is your move. You could spend part of that 6 months researching how this person does his 180 spin armbar, how that other person does his 180 spin armbar. When has this been done in competition? You could just watch competition in general. Some people really absorb that as well. And if you can, even a little bit of light drilling, either shadow wrestling by yourself or drilling with a sane, responsible, usually smaller partner, is a really good way to just keep your movement going so that you're not completely uncoordinated when you get back. At least you're still moving a bit like a jiu-jitsu guy. Probably wouldn't recommend sparring, but there are certain kinds of drilling and movement drills that you can do, and those can be really useful. The point is to keep your head in the game, right? And watching video, watching instructionals, and doing a little bit of drilling really help with that. Now, when you come back to the mats, when you return to the mats, expect it to suck. This is a really discouraging time, and nobody knows this better than I, because I've come back from a lot of injuries and other, enforced layoffs. It really, really sucks when you're a black belt and you come back and there's a purple belt that you're 50 pounds heavier than, and he's tapping you out. Believe me, this sucks. It's going to be ego crushing, and that's just the way it is. You are strong enough to train, you're strong enough to get good. Be strong enough to accept the mental ass whooping you're about to take on your ego when you can't beat people that you used to. As a rough rule of thumb, if you were laid up for 6 months, if you took 6 months off, it's going to take you 6 years. 6 years. If you were laid off for 6 months, it's going to take you 6 months to get back to where you were. As a rough rule of thumb, it depends how early in your development you are. If you've been training for 2 months, it's not going to take you 6 months to get back to where you were at 2 months. But the longer the layoff, the longer the comeback period. During that comeback period, your number one priority is, you guessed it, don't get re-injured. This is not a time to test yourself against a big 250-pound ruffian, the competitive brown belt who's gunning for a position at Abu Dhabi and thinks that every match is a death match. This is not the guy to roll with. The guys to roll with are usually the smaller guys, although there can be some very controlled bigger guys. The guys who are not super aggro, the guys who are not explosive and spastic. It's better to have some guy who methodically passes the guard and crushes you, but crushes you in slow motion, because you can tap out at any point if your shoulder begins to hurt, than it is the guy who throws himself past your guard, and in the process catches your arm, rips that shoulder, undoes all that good work, and now you're back to square one. So do not get re-injured. Incidentally, when you come back to the mat, there'll be a couple of things that you'll find will typically be the problems. Number one, if you do a lot of grip work, if you do a lot of, say, spider guard or delahiva, and your game is really dependent on your grip, you'll find that your grip is just horrible. Your hands will be quivering like this after sparring for even a couple of minutes. This is normal. This will come back. Hopefully you're doing some kind of conditioning for your grip while you're off. But even so, it's not sport specific. It's just not used to that same rigors of hang on to somebody's lapel or hang on to somebody's sleeve. So your grip will probably be shot. For me, the weird body parts, my adductors, the muscles that bring my legs together, always ache after a layoff and getting back to the mats. And I guess you don't realize how much you use those legs to clamp people, to hold people, to squeeze people, until, and this isn't a movement that you do in regular life. So, you start doing this all of a sudden, and you go back to your old game, which relied on, say, clamping. All of a sudden, muscles you never knew existed, muscles you took for granted, are going to be hurting, and that's perfectly normal. Number 3 is your cardio. Even if you've been running, even if you've been doing sprint intervals on the bike or whatever, grappling is different. It might be because it's not as easy to get into a rhythmic breath. It's not so easy to go. And when you're grappling, you're going to hold your breath, and all of a sudden you're going to gas. Again, this is normal. And depending on what your game is like, you might be finding other limitations in your game when you finally get back to the mat. Just accept them. It took you a while to get good initially. You were gone for a while. It's going to take a while to get back to where you were. Don't worry, this is normal. Everybody goes through it. Everybody at the podium at the Mundials, everybody on the podium at Abu Dhabi has had a layoff of some sort and has fought their way back. They did it, you can do it too.